can hear you. The water has memory.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. Lovely to see you all again. For those that have been joining us since the 2nd of June, and welcome to those joining us for the very first time. We're very happy to have you joining us. Water in Communications 2026. Today is the 7th session, the one preceding the last one, and we're glad to have you all here. We're welcoming a few more people joining, and we will begin in a moment. Welcome, everyone.
Continue to pass on the knowledge that needs to be given unto the other generations. You are the keeper of the water.
To make the change in this life condition that we're in, that great-grandchildren will stand up to this truth of what life is about, and to live it in such an honorable way, the way ancestors came to this earth.
And that is Sing the Water Song. I love how it really puts so much emphasis on the role of the ancestors and, our connection with water. And that's why I was playing that to start today's session as we look at closing the inequality gaps. Just to acknowledge those of you joining from different parts of the world, thank you. For those just joining, please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself. Good morning to Paul joining from Canada. Namaste to Roy joining from India. Connor, it's lovely to see you. Hello from the heatwave heat in London, clashing with the London Climate Week, I can imagine. Amdi from Tunisia, welcome. Hello to Enric from Sweden, Argentina, Algeria, from Nigeria, Madagascar. From Dubai. Lovely to see you all joining from different parts of the world. Welcome. You probably know the drill by now. As you join, please go into that interpretation icon on your Zoom interface. You find the globes icon, or you find interpretation, and there you can choose to listen to the rest of the webinar either in Spanish, Arabic. Thanks to Interprify for doing a great job and making sure that all the sessions are available in Spanish and Arabic. To those of you joining from different parts of the world, welcome. I also will kindly ask that you rename yourself depending on the language you're using. If you're English speaking, please use ENG. For Spanish speaking participants, please use ES, and for Arabic-speaking participants, please use AR as a prefix before your name, just so you can identify with people from the same region and connect easily. Other house rules: you're muted when you join. We ask that you please stay muted so that there is decorum and we can enjoy or learn from our speakers. But if you can, feel free to turn on your camera. It's always lovely to see other faces join in. to see your beautiful faces. So feel free to turn on your cameras if you can. And as you do that, let me also remind you that this session is being recorded. Recordings are already up and running on the YouTube World Water Week YouTube channel. It's 2026 Water in Communications playlist. You can find all the sessions in Arabic, in Spanish, and in English from session 1 up until session 6 so far. This session and the last session will also be uploaded on our YouTube channel. If you missed any of the session and you want to just do a recap, feel free to check it out on YouTube. Water in Communications, we've gotten to with near the finish line, if I could put it that way. Since the 2nd of June up till now, we've had 6 sessions looking at different themes and topics, and we have 2 more sessions to go. I want to say thank you to everyone that has joined us, communicators, conveners of events, climate journalists, environmentalists that are interested in water from different parts of the world. Thank you for joining us. And I do hope that you've seen value in this workshop series and that you are enabled to communicate water for collective action going forward. And talking about going forward, I'm very much excited, and I mentioned this last week on Thursday. In August, we are going to have a global showcase of water stories. So it's not enough that you've just learned a lot and you know how to do this, you know how to write better, how to inspire action. We want to see you put them in action. So the instructions are out there. If you've participated in the Water in Communications webinar series, then you probably know some of the drills. What should your story be about? Make it community-centered. Let it highlight 2026 as a converging moment for water. Use the ELCH elements. Make sure your story reflects humanity, emotions, local voice, credibility, hope, and action. Avoid misinformation or disinformation. Ask the litmus test. Will I be comfortable if this story was told about me or my family? And make sure it is original. And then you get the chance to present it when we meet in August for the August session, or if you like, call it the additional session. And this session will be your own session where you get the chance to present to other participants. And we will be selecting some of the stories to be featured during World Water Week in Stockholm. So you have up until 30th of June, next week, Tuesday, to express your interest, to submit. You'll see the QR code coming up soon. And there you have to answer questions about your availability in August 6th, when we'll be having this session. It's going to be about the same time, 2 o'clock to 3:30 Stockholm time. And it's going to take 5 minutes, you presenting and then breaking into groups where you reflect on the process of writing your story and also connect with other people, learn from them as to just get thoughts around developing your story even stronger. I also want to say a very big thank you to some of the participants this year that have volunteered to publish stories. So if you have stories but you don't know how to publish it, some volunteers have, I think, Sumbol of Water Storytellers, Oliver also have volunteered to publish your stories on their platform. I will send out more information about that in an email, but just so you know, if you want to submit your story, to the left is the QR code for you to express your interest. You don't need to put in the story right now, but just so we know that you will submit a story before the deadline, July 10th. And to the right is the QR code that takes you to the form where you can submit your story. All of this information you can also find on Google Drive, as you see on the slide. And this QR code takes you to the Google slide. There you'll find the survey request. You find this, the survey form that helps you express what you think about the Water in Communications, ways to improve them, what work, which session thrilled you the most, what could we have done differently. You also use that form to request for your certificates, and we will make sure you get the certificates. All session slides from session 1 to 8 will be saved there. All the relevant links to any link we've shared at all, you will find it there, as well as the full program, information about August session, and the summary from all of the chats from session 1 to session 6 or session 8. So everything you need, you can find on the Google Drive right there. Just to give a recap or a picture of what next, where do we go from here? You'll get a wrap-up email from us by the 26th of June. That's on Friday after we wrap up. Between now and then, you can already begin to develop your water stories for the August 6th session and submit them as soon as you have them. Mid-July, the deadline for that is July 10th, and we'll look through all the stories that come in and select those that we'll be presenting. We'll communicate that to you via email. During that period, you also get certificates for attending. And remember, the requirement is that you've attended 75%. That's 6 out of 8 sessions. For those of you that are in other parts of the world, it also counts that you've watched the recording. So that is fine. And then we meet again August 6th for the open session, where you will be doing more of the speaking, and hoping to see many of you again joining us in Stockholm for the World Water Week, where we also get to feature some of your stories from the Water in Communication session. More details about World Water Week you can find on the website, worldwaterweek.org. That's a QR code you could also scan to see the program and check out more about World Water Week. Many thanks to Grundfos Foundation, 6 years of bringing water in communications to communicators, scientists, conveners of programs around the world. And we're really grateful to Grundfos Foundation for making this possible. As we get on to the conversation today, if you're wondering who we are, my name is Sheyifumi Adebote. I'm an environmentalist and communications professional, and together with Guy De Santos, digital assistant at World Water Week, we will be making sure that you get the best of today's session. Probably no need to run through the outlines again. Week 1, we laid the foundation. Week 2, we looked into policy, influence, misinformation. And week 3, which was last week, we looked into beyond the claims, how to investigate stories, moving from policy to people. And I am super, super excited for today's session as we try, and this is one thing we've not looked at yet. What are the inequalities? Where do we still find inequalities in water stories, how they are being told? And how can we close that gap beyond ticking the box? I remember many years ago, they're like, oh, we want young people, and they tick the box. So beyond just ticking the box of, we want Indigenous representative, how can we really close these gaps when it comes to water inequalities that are present? That's going to be the focus of Water in Communications today. And I'm sure you're very excited. Feel free to put in the chat your impressions, your thoughts, what you're looking forward to learn. And as you do that, just before I also welcome our speakers, I want to just get you to reflect a little bit on last Thursday's session, which was from policy to people. And this is a slide from Anne that says, or that sort of asks you to ask yourself these questions when you write. What do you want? Who do you want to take action? How do they see themselves and the world? What are their deeply held values? How can you connect to what they care about? And how can you make what you're sharing more useful to them? Very powerful questions to ask to strengthen your water stories. And Samuel Ajala, also from the last session, shared with us this. I think it's a very simple way of converting technical reports to stories. Find the human stake, locate one number, and work with it. Name the winners, name the losers, and translate the jargons. I just wanted you to reflect a little bit on this from the last session as we go on to today's session. I know you also have quite a lot of reflections from the previous session. So thank you so very much for joining. We see some X on the screen. We will stop sharing for a moment and then share again with the hope that those X are no longer on the screen when we begin. But my guest today, if you're wondering, I'm very delighted to have with me for today's session, Jonathon Captain-Webb, Qaanitah Hunter, and Felicia Vacarelu. I'll read their profile as quick as I can. Let's see. Jonathon, thank you so much for joining us. Jonathon is a Gomero and Dunhunting man, born and raised in the Redfern Aboriginal community. He currently serves as director of the First Nations program at Environmental Defenders Office, where he leads national work supporting First Nations people to protect country, water, and cultural heritage through law reforms, strategic litigation, and capacity building. Welcome, Jonathon. We're very happy to have you with us today. And we also have with us Qaanitah Hunter. Qaanitah and I crossed paths a few months ago where she was speaking at a session, and I said to myself, I really need to get a perspective also on water, because she spoke with so much passion. She is the founding editor of the Debrief Network, an independent digital newsroom based in Johannesburg that delivers sharp, accessible political journalism for a new generation of South African news consumer. She's also the senior political correspondent at Newzroom Afrika, a weekly political columnist for News 24. Thank you so much for joining us, Qaanitah. Lovely to see you. Not the least, Felicia Vacarelu, thank you for joining us. She is the communications lead at UN Water, currently serves as the communications manager, where she leads strategic communications that cuts through the complexities and drive impact. Many of you know UN Water, and we're very happy to have her sharing her insights on how she's been building bold, forward-looking communications that connect global priorities to people and position issues for action. Thank you so much, three of you, for joining. We'll start with Jonathon. He's got a presentation. We'll run through that for the first couple of minutes, and then we'll get into that panel session where we speak a little bit. Thereafter, we'll break into breakout rooms where you get the chance to speak a little bit more and, up close with our speakers today. Jonathon, welcome, and thank you once again for joining us.
Yama, thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you all this evening, Australian time, or afternoon, or morning, wherever you're connecting from across the globe. Before I jump into my slides this evening, wanting to acknowledge the countries that we're all connecting from today. It's with amazing humility and respect that I acknowledge the lands that I'm connecting from, the lands of the Dark and Young people who are the First Nations, peoples of the lands that I'm connecting from here today. It's with amazing humility and respect that I acknowledge all the lands that you're connecting from. I acknowledge those old people, our elders that have come before us, who have kept country, who have kept story, so we can walk in their footsteps. And I extend that humility and respect to all of you here joining us. And as we journey over the next couple of hours exploring what water means to us and what water means to First Nations people across the globe as well. Thank you. So coming into a little bit of the work that I do. So as mentioned earlier, my name is Jonathon Captain-Webb. Gomeroi Dunghutti man, my country starts in Australia, west of the Great Dividing Range on the granite country, so the granite stone, and it runs all the way across to where the red dirt country is. So about 8 hours west of where my country starts is where my country ends, and then it flows into my great-grandmother's country as well. That's a little bit about me and my connection to my country, and my connection to my water is something that's really significant to First Nations peoples, not just in Australia, but across the globe, in that First Nations peoples, Indigenous people across the globe, we are place people. Our identity, our culture, our stories, and our connections are intrinsically connected to places. And so our sacred rivers, our sacred mountains, our sacred places, all are anchored in place. And so for us, there's a physical reference point where generation after generation, after generation will always have an opportunity to return to connect. So today, I want to talk to you about protecting water country, specifically the role of First Nations people in water management and protection. But more than that, I want to invite you to rethink, what is water itself? For me, water is not a resource. It's not an asset. It's not something that can be owned or possessed, but it is a living thing. It is something that is relational, something that is living. So a little bit about the work that I do before I jump into some more content. Ooh, if we can go back one slide, please. Amazing. So when we talk about water from a First Nations perspective, we have to start with a relationship, because for First Nations people, water is not something that's external to us. It is not a resource, it's not an asset. Water is a part of us. In our worldview, we are intrinsically connected to our country, and our country includes our lands, waters, skies, stories, and our traditional laws. There is a cycle in how we understand life. We come from country, we live on country, and when we pass away and go to that next place, we return to country. And so does our water. Our body is made up of 90% of water. So when we pass away and we return to the earth, to that country, so does our water. That goes into those underwater aquifers. They come up through those freshwater springs, those creeks where those springs run from, go into our rivers. Those rivers flood our country. Those rivers evaporate, go up into the clouds, and that rains all across our country. And then again, it goes through that continuous cycle, that continuous journey. And so for me, I don't see, from a First Nations worldview, a separation from that water, because I know in a very short amount of time, in the scheme of life itself, that I will return to country and my water will return to those river systems and continue to travel country. And so if we truly understood water in that way as a part of ourselves, how differently would we treat our water? That is a question that I'm going to keep going back to and explore more as we jump into our breakout sessions. That's a little bit about me in terms of my bio. Let's keep moving forward. We'll jump forward one more, conscious of timing and creating a space for our other speakers this afternoon. So when we look at the significance of First Nations water rights and interests, water holds a deep cultural significance for First Nations people. As this slide shows, water is central to social, cultural, spiritual, and economic well-being for First Nations people across the globe. But I want to expand on that. Water is not just important, it is foundational. It sustains ecosystems, it holds stories, it is a reference point for First Nations people's identity. And importantly, it sustains our responsibility to be able to care for our country as well. But globally, and in Australia, we're seeing water increasingly treated as something different. If we can keep going to our next slide. Well, we might go back one. Water is constantly being commoditized. It is traded, it is allocated, it is priced based on economic value. It supports agriculture, industries, city drinking water, and even emerging demands like new and exciting and innovative opportunities like data centers. And so what we're seeing is, while those uses matter and they are important, they reflect a worldview where water is something that can be extracted and controlled. In Australia, water is largely treated as an asset. And within that system, First Nations rights and interests are often marginalised, or they're diminished to a point where the First Nations rights and interests, when it comes to water, is one interest amongst several interests that exist. We'll keep moving forward. One of the amazing pieces that we do see is, I think we might go back. There should be a statement, an Echuca statement. Back one more. Mustn't be in the slide deck. We'll just stay here for the time being. But what we do see is First Nations people have looked at what are the different mechanisms, whether it's the legal or the political mechanisms, to assert what does country mean and what does the importance of water mean. So the concept of cultural flows is becoming really important in Australian context. A couple of years ago, a group of First Nations came together who all had a connection to the Murray-Darling Basin, so a series of rivers that interconnect and extend across several First Nations in the New South Wales Victorian state border region of Australia. And they advocated that water entitlements legally and beneficially owned to First Nations of sufficient quality and quantity to improve social, cultural, environmental, social and economic conditions. And importantly, they are an inherent right. So here we've seen examples of First Nations coming together and articulating that there is a cultural interest that exists with water flows. So separate from environmental water allocations, agriculture, industry, drinking water, water infrastructure, that there are a different set of rights and interests that First Nations people see in terms of water, and these cultural flows are really important. So First Nations that have access to their water, we know that there is a cultural flow that travels downstream that connects groups of First Nations to other First Nations communities. And in a macro level, we see that across different jurisdictions. So nation states that have water flowing through their countries, they know what the impact looks like downstream, has flow-on implications to other nation states. So think of it like that. But First Nations looking at the cultural lens, that their cultural identity connected to that water. If it's impacted, then that has flow-on implications to other First Nations that connect to those waters as well. And so what this does is it shifts this conversation that it is not about what is leftover water for First Nations people or for the environment. It's not about symbolic inclusion. It's about what is ownership, governance, and self-determination. It recognizes that the health of water is directly tied to the health of people and to the health of country more broadly. One of the things that we're only starting to see recognized in Western science frameworks is the importance of First Nations rights and interests to waters. First Nations communities have long advocated for water to be returned to culturally significant places, swamps, wetlands, lagoons, these natural systems created through flooding, not through water infrastructure. When they receive water, they thrive. They support biodiversity, culture, and ecological balance, all in one, living in that natural harmony. But when these places are deprived of water, they dry out. And when they dry out, that organic matter often decomposes, releasing carbon into the atmosphere. So removing water doesn't just harm culture, it contributes to a climate crisis that we're seeing underway at the moment. So restoring water does the exact opposite. It regenerates ecosystems and it stores carbon in our wetlands, in our swamps, in our lagoons. And that's really, really important because if we're going to address a climate catastrophe that's at our doorsteps, these First Nations knowledge and their science is really critical in how we develop a climate adaptive way of looking at water as well. If we keep going forward to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples slide, and I might stop there, but at an international level, we see several frameworks in how we look after the environment, how we address climate. But one of the items that I'm conscious of is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. UNDRIP, as it's known as, outlines key rights, connections to lands and waters, ownership and control of traditional country and cultural heritage, and a framework for how governments and decision makers must engage with Indigenous peoples under these principles of free, prior, and informed consent. But there is a challenge because these principles are often not ratified into domestic legislation, so they're not enforceable unless nation states embed these into domestic law. So while they're providing a strong framework and an aspiration that First Nations people seek to hold governments to account, there is still a gap between the commitment and the implementation. And that's one of the barriers that we're seeing, not just in Australia, but across the globe in First Nations people exercising rights, autonomy, self-determination over their traditional country and their waters. I'll stop there and create some time and some space for the fellow presenters to talk a little bit more. But I'll deep dive into this in far more detail at our breakout session.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And I'm curious to hear what more has to be said, because it seems like you've really exhausted it, spoken very to a very deep extent about the role of Indigenous people and the connection with water. And I do think that everyone, either you identify as an Indigenous person or not, has that relationship with water. And that's what came alive in your presentation. Thank you so much. And for those of you who might be wondering why Jonathan was saying this evening, it's because he's joining us from Australia, where it is 10:31 p.m. So we're really grateful that you can make this sacrifice to be with us. Thank you. I'll move quickly to Qaanitah, and then I'll come back to Felicia, where we'll start with a 1 minute 51 second video. But Qaanitah, the work you do is around high-stake political stories in South Africa. And you've, in your different articles and pieces, talked about how water inequality is shaped by political decisions, from tariffs to budgets to infrastructure. Can you share an example with us that brings it to life about how you find water stories in the midst of political developments, and what makes it compelling that in telling this story, we must not lose that human element?
Thank you very much. So there is a sort of interesting scenario where I come from, which is Johannesburg, where it's very often that there's no water in your taps. And this morning when I walked into work, a colleague of mine who lives very close to me asked, "Hey, did you have water?" Because we did not have water. And it's not an anomaly, and it wouldn't even be newsworthy if most of the city is without water. And so the question is that, is it a drought? Is that the reason why you won't have water in a tap in one of Africa's biggest metropolitan cities? Or, and the answer is no, that it is the result of service delivery failure and a result of inherent corruption. So we have never seen the direct pipeline from the consequences of inefficient government, corruption, and lack of infrastructure maintenance directly on people's lives, like we've seen in the when it comes to the water crisis as you have it in South Africa. Now, previously, when South Africa Cape Town had a water crisis in 2016, where what was called day zero was imminent, meaning that there was a drought. And usually in the Western Cape, there's a lot of rain in winter, and that sustains the province for the rest of the year. And at that time, there was extreme concern around the fact that Cape Town, which is a very big city, could run out of water. That could make sense to the ordinary South African in the sense that this is as a result of a climate situation, right? But fast forward a decade and you have water outages and a so-called day zero in big parts of the country. It started becoming part of the lexicon, right? Which is words like water shedding, right? Unthinkable 10 years ago, in the sense that there's almost a rotational system where one suburb will have water and the one suburb will not have water. And this has nothing to do with drought, and this has nothing to do with the amount of water that is in reservoirs. So it really is a different type of story in terms of how you communicate people's lived experience, right? Because the indignity, the first element that we have to acknowledge when you're talking about the shortage of water, the fact that people open their taps and not have water for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, is the question of indignity. The second part of it comes to if you want to be solutions orientated, you have to figure out the why, right? And in a place like Johannesburg and in many municipalities across South Africa, the why is often related to a corrupt element, which changes the game a little bit. So earlier this year, we had widespread protests by communities over the lack of water. The municipality had come out to say that it is a result of a fault in a reservoir, and that there would be water tankers that would be going out to communities to replenish their water in the interim. It turns out that South Africa has a phenomenon called the water tanker mafia. I wish I was making this up. And that water tanker mafia is a phenomenon where business and organized criminals sort of converge to essentially damage infrastructure so that they can get tenders and they can get government contracts to provide water to communities. So in some municipalities, like a municipality in sort of the hinterland of the nation, of the country, called Maluti Apofong, which is also an area called Harrismith, surrounding areas, there are municipalities areas that almost never have running water and is completely reliant on these water tankers. And that, if you are a municipal official that actually fixes the pipes so that the communities can have water, you can be killed, because it essentially interrupts the pipeline of corrupt business. And so essentially what you have is a criminal, so you have a water crisis that is hinged on criminality. And so these sort of water mafia have found refuge in politics and in political systems. So what happens is a municipality will have to pay hundreds and thousands of rands for water, and that water never ever reaches communities. The other manifestation of how the water mafia works is that the municipality would pay them to provide a service to a community, and then they would then extort the community by charging hefty amounts for this water. And you see this repeated scenario where it is undisputed, even by political leadership, that says that basically it's provable now that every time infrastructure gets fixed, it is actively sabotaged so that these corrupt pipelines are not interrupted. Now, it's not without consequence. Who are the people that have to deal with this? These are women, these are mothers, these are people who are at the cold front of it. Now, for a very long time, we were trying to sound the alarm to say, hey, Joburg, your pipes have at least 50% of water from reservoirs get wasted as a result of leaks and cracks and the lack of infrastructure maintenance. Now, people don't understand that. People don't understand that people, you pay for your water usage every month. How come pipes do not maintain? And that only sort of hit home for so many people when we started demonstrating through social video how this woman how does she survive with no water, that she collects rainwater, another person. And so we had to then create this very tangible visual line that explains to people that when you don't have water in your tap, it has nothing to do with the fact that there has not been rain. And so that demonstration was most effective in making people understand that this is not a water crisis that is man-made. And that's when the politics of it then comes to play, in the sense that at the end of the day, if it's a man-made problem, it has to be a man-made solution.
Let me
right?
jump in there, Qaanitah. We'll come to that solution because I'm really burning to hear about a little bit more about it. But what you've done right now is to first bring out that human element, how it's not just, a tap, turning it on. You've brought about how it connects to livelihood, to mothers, to children. You've also shown us very clearly the politics of water and access to water. I'll come back to you, but let me move very quickly to Felicia. And I mean, what I want to hear from you now is, we are journalists, we're communicators right here. We want to know, how can we tell this story better? How can we close these gaps? Felicia, I should start with your video first and then come to ask you the question that leans on, your work at the intersection of digital innovation and storytelling. I had a look at the video and I see that it connects with Indigenous people too. Interesting. Yes, Felicia.
It actually does. And so just very quickly to kind of give the video an introduction. And thanks, Jonathon, and thanks, Qaanitah, because it's extraordinary to hear these perspectives, and it's really empowering. Just quickly on the video. So this year, and I'll talk about it more later, World Water Day. The theme for World Water Day this year was deeply connected to water and gender equality. And we ran it under the tagline, where water flows, equality grows. And the video you're going to see is a video that was actually part of the campaign, which was put together by a wonderful documentarist. His name is Michael Zelniker, and he actually let us borrow this snippet for the World Water Day campaign. And it fits so well with these conversations that I quickly sent it to Sewi, because I actually think it really shows exactly what we're talking about today.
El agua la consideramos como la sangre de la madre tierra. O ser humano sem água não vive. Os seres vivos sem água não vive.
There's still more than 2 billion people without access to safely managed drinking water.
Everything relies on water. And if we don't have water, then we won't have humanity.
मला एकच म्हणायचंय की पाण्याविना माणूस मरता कामा नये.
People are suffering from lack of things that are human rights, and that is wrong. That is simply and plain wrong.
We want water to drink, to stay alive, because we are human beings.
We have the right to love. And if we love, we must have water.
Water is life.
Água é vida, não é?
Water is life.
ปัญหาก็คือชีวิต
Agora é vida, né?
Water is life.
Água é vida.
El agua es vida.
Coming back to you, Felicia, some more reflections on this and some opening remarks also.
Thanks, Sewi, and thank you, first and foremost, to Sewi, and thank you to all of these collaborators for gathering us today, because these discussions are really important, especially in today's environment. Like Sewi said, I actually work, and I'm sorry that I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. I will learn it, I promise. I work for UN Water, and just to kind of give you a little sense, because some of you might have heard about us and some of you might not. We are an interagency coordination mechanism of the United Nations system. We have existed for a very long time, and our purpose is actually to bring water and sanitation issues to the forefront. Why? Because the UN system All of the entities and agencies of the UN system work on water-related issues in various sections and with various stakeholders, but there is no UN entity that deals particularly with water and sanitation. UN Water was born out of the need to really look at water and sanitation as a goal in itself, as a purpose in itself, and not interlinked with what we used to have prior to the 2015 agenda, which were called the Millennium Development Goals. We comprise all the 36 UN entities of the United Nations system and another 52 international partners, all of them working on water and sanitation. And by the way, SIWI is one of our partners, and we are very grateful to have you as a partner. For me, I run communications, and of course, this is a very difficult task, but it's also a very enjoyable and wonderful task, because we've been talking so much about water inequalities. We've been talking so much about all of the injustices that are happening. And of course, from the UN system perspective, we also look at the big picture, we look at the local picture, we look at the regional picture. So there's a lot of stuff that comes into play when we look at water and sanitation. And we really look at water and sanitation from so many different angles. And so you had mentioned, right, working at the intersection of digital innovation and storytelling, and how do we bring these stories really to life? This video is one of those examples. It's really bringing real people, real experiences. And again, this is a snippet of a 7-part documentary. I do invite you to go out there, find the documentary, The Struggle of Mother Earth, and watch the documentary because it's fantastic. But we look at a couple of things together, and we run international observances. We run a lot of communications around water and sanitation. We look at the inequalities and we look at the challenges, but we also look at the successes that we've achieved and the lessons we've learned from those successes. Because there are successes, and just to quickly mention, before 2015, in the UN, we didn't even have a goal that was dedicated specifically on water and sanitation. Now we have 10 years of a dedicated goal, which is SDG 6 on water and sanitation. We have the data and we have the research that show us what progress we've made, where we're still lacking, and where we need to go. All of these things really help us when we do the part of the storytelling. The research, the data, the background, the policies, they're all important, but the human element is equally important. So it really is a combination of this. And because I've been working a lot also with digital innovations, I wanted to say one last thing. One of the biggest tools or assets at the moment, and this is for me personally, that I find in this area, is really changing the way that we listen to things. For the longest time, communication was often about pushing information out, producing reports, publishing stories, launching campaigns. Right now, we have social listening and audience intelligence tools that really allow us to analyze the conversations across countries, across languages, across communities, and speak to what the people are interested in. And we can unpack this later, but this is one of the things that has been helping communicate the water and sanitation issues that we see at the global level to the various audiences and stakeholders that we have all over the world. But for now, I'll stop there and we can continue the conversations.
Thank you so very much, Felicia. Thank you indeed. And I'm hoping that in the breakout rooms, with those who will join you, you can unpack this a little bit more. Because in a world where everyone wants to speak, wants to share things, listening seems to be very scarce, and learning to listen, I'm curious to hear how that works. Thank you a lot for sharing. And I guess you are in Switzerland right now.
Yes, actually, and this comes to Qaanitah's, she mentioned something about water scarcity and droughts when she started her story. And I wanted to say this year, Switzerland is experiencing drought, actually. Communicating that inside Switzerland is incredibly difficult because people see that it's raining. People do not understand drought in a country like Switzerland. And this is a big communication challenge, but for the very first time in many, many years, Switzerland is experiencing a heavy drought. And we're seeing it everywhere, but people aren't feeling it. So we need to bring it to the attention of the people in ways that they actually connect to.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. And I really love the mix of our speakers today, from South Africa to Felicia in Switzerland, and Jonathon joining us from Australia. Jonathon, if I could turn to you and say, Yama, thank you again for joining and staying with us. I see a question in the chat from Connor that also is very similar to the question that I had. I was going to ask you. So I'm just going to read Connor's question. How can we move governance system away from modernist perspectives that treat water as an infinite resource to start prioritizing indigenous ontologies?
Thanks for the question, and a big kia ora to my colleague Connor, who's sort of connecting from Aotearoa. And so really, really love the question. It is a big question. And so it might take me a little bit to dissect it because there's a couple of, I guess, intersections there. I think from my perspective, moving away from a modernist water governance framework where water is treated as infinite, extractable, and purely economic requires more than just policy reform. It requires a shift in how we understand our relationship to lands, waters, country more broadly. Because the current system is built on that separation, humans are here, water is there, and there's something in the middle to manage, control, and allocate that. I think relational ontologies, both from an Indigenous perspective, starts from a completely different place. They see water as embedded in relationships because people, ecosystems, culture, and future generations are all interconnected and have a relationship that connects us to our water. So the transition isn't just technical, it's relational, but also institutional. And there are three practical shifts that I see that as a culture, as a civilization, as a people, we really need to progress. And I don't solely see that sitting within the hands of governments or decision makers. There is a human component that we need to think about as well. The first is, how do we recenter governance around responsibility and obligation, not rights or privileges? So modern systems focuses on who has the right to take water. From a relational system, we ask who has the responsibility to care for this water and what does that require? And I think when we start to change that dynamic, it opens space for Indigenous laws, First Nations stewardship, and intergenerational thinking to guide our decisions instead of who has the most rights here and rights that can be defended within our Western legal frameworks as well. The second is, how do we embed Indigenous, First Nations, and local authority in decision-making? So not advisory roles, not consultations, not engagement, but true decision-making power. Because relational systems can't be laid on top of extractive ones, if that makes sense. First Nations people cannot approach an item or an issue like water management protection from a relationship standpoint, where the people sitting on the other side of the table are looking at it from an extractive one, right? It's transactional, but First Nations are being relational. They need to be lived through that governance. So who decides when water flows, how much is taken, what is protected? That's where concepts like cultural flows become critical. They operationalize that relationship, not just recognizing the legal rights and interests. I think the third component looks at how do we measure what matters differently. Right now, success is often defined in terms of efficiency, allocation, and economic return. And those ways of seeing water naturally sort of informs and shapes decision-making as well. But relational approaches measures ecosystem health, cultural continuity, community well-being, and what is the long-term sustainability, not over the course of a strategic cycle, but thinking 7 generations ahead for children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren. How do we think about that from a sustainability standpoint? So not looking at a 4-year strategic cycle or a government re-election cycle, because if the river is dying or communities are disconnected, then systems aren't working, no matter how efficient it might look on paper. So that's how I answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Jonathon. Really appreciate that. And there is one thing I took from that, I mean, among many other things, but that question around we need to move from asking who has the right to take water to who has the responsibility to take care of water. I'll keep that with me as I move to Qaanitah for one question. I mean, just to build on the point you were making, Qaanitah, before we break into the breakout rooms. And thanks a lot, participants, for joining from different parts of the world. In a few minutes, we'll break into 3 breakout rooms. The first is going to be on Indigenous perspective and the gaps. Jonathon will be listening to you. Felicia talked about that earlier, but also discussing with you on his thoughts around closing that gap. And then Qaanitah will be in the gender gaps. What are the gender and political gaps around water that is widening water inequalities, and how can we close it? And then Felicia will be speaking more around the identity, finance, but also the international frameworks that make it difficult for people to engage with these topics. So Qaanitah, back to you. You made a point, and I'm sorry for jumping in and interrupting you earlier, but I just wanted to tie it all together. And reflect on what is one practical technique. I mean, you've talked about the gap, you've talked about how these gaps are created, the impact of these gaps, the human connection. But now talk to us as communicators who are really curious. We want to see that we can close these gaps without feeling like we are the saviors coming to save these communities. So what's one technique, what's one thing we should keep in mind when we report on communities that are left behind, when we report on these gaps and attempt to close them through our pen?
So I think the age-old thing of show, don't tell. And that is the principle that's going to essentially be able to lead to that impact. And again, people relate to people. And so when we come to these issues through the lens of officialdom, if that's a word, of the official side of things, we lose people. And so when we talking to people, the most important thing to understand is that people connect to people. People do not connect to theories, and people do not connect to what is official. And that, for me, has been the most powerful way in, one, creating empathy, but also, 2, in change making.
Thank you. People listen to people. Thank you so very much. Let me go to let me go back to you, Felicia, before we break into the breakout rooms. We have about 2 minutes before that. And you talked a little bit about this earlier, where you mentioned, the SDGs. Coming up very soon will be the second UN Water Conference. Many people are excited about it. We have national action plans, at country level, at regional levels. And these are documentations that show water commitments, so they exist on papers. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts around how journalists or communicators can track whether these commitments are actually being kept, or if they are helping to close this gap that we've established that exists?
Thanks. It's always a tricky question, right? Because it is true, everything starts on paper. And that's the reality of how the world operates. What we do as communicators, what we do as journalists, what we try to do here as well, and we do it for every single communication product that we put out there. We follow the data, we follow the reporting, we follow the lessons learned, we look at what comes next, we focus on the progress and what we have done to make that progress move faster. And then we combine all of that with what we just heard from Qaanitah. We combine it with the local realities, because statistics tell us what is changing, but communities tell us whether that change is being felt. There are a number of resources out there, and UN Water collects a lot of them. When I say we follow the data, there is something called the SDG 6 data portal. This data portal is updated regularly with the latest available information from countries and from UN agencies. And it's one of the best places where you can really check progress, where you can compare the trends. These resources exist. We look at the SDG 6 progress reports. And I know reports are heavy and they're hefty, and that's why it's our job to translate them into actual language. So we do look at the data and then we combine it with the human element.
Look at the data and combine it with the human element. Same thing that Jonathon and Qaanitah said, in other words, look at the data, combine it with the human element. And with that, we break into the breakout rooms. 3 breakout rooms will be launched right now. One is on Indigenous perspective, where you'll be in the same room with Jonathon. I see in the chat there's been quite a number of reflections around that, so feel free to take those reflections a bit further. Second will be Qaanitah on gender and political gaps, or how gender and political issues are widening these gaps. And then the third will be with Felicia around financial tools, policy tools, and also the identity of people from different regions and what that means for these gaps. So I'm launching the breakout rooms now. Feel free to choose depending on which of the 3 groups interest you. One person can choose to take notes, and then the Qaanitah, Jonathon, and Felicia will sort of moderate those breakout rooms. All right, the rooms are open, so let's go, and we'll be back in 20 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Few more seconds and the breakout rooms will be closed. Remember, if you want to listen in Spanish or Arabic, just look for the interpretation, the globe icon with interpretation under your Zoom menu, and then you can join Arabic channel, Spanish channel, and follow the conversations there. I'm curious to hear back from the rooms. I did join some of the rooms and listen to, I think all the rooms were really engaged, and that's really, really good to note. No breakout rooms. Yes, so all the rooms were engaged. I followed very closely, and now we begin to take some reflections from the breakout rooms. We'll close the breakout rooms now. Gu, please, if you could help with that, so that everyone comes in and we can wrap up today. It's been very exciting, very interesting learning from diverse group of people. Felicia joining us from UN Women, Debrief Network in South Africa, and Jonathon joining us from Australia, where he works with First Nations defenders. Let's see, a few more seconds and everyone should be back in the main room. But feel free to use in the chat your reflections from the room. If you also want to speak, you could use the raise hand function. And once everyone is back in the room, we'll take some reflections as quickly as we can. But I also encourage you all to use the chat. The breakout room will close in 10 seconds, and we will get on with or wrap up with the conversation today. It's the 7th session of the Water in Communications 2026. We're looking at the topic, Water Inequalities, closing the gap beyond ticking the box. How can we close those gaps beyond just saying, hey, we recognize the Indigenous people, we recognize young people, we recognize the women, how can we really close the gap? That's the focus of today's session. Let's see. So, reflections from the breakout room. I think everyone is back here. Welcome back. Really, really happy to have you back. I hope it was exciting. I followed through and I did enjoy some of the conversations you were having. But I want to listen to you now. Let's start with representative from Felicia. And if no one is speaking, our panelists can then grab the mic. Who wants to start from Felicia's group? Felicia, I think we turn to you. What were your reflections? What did you discuss? And how do you wrap up today's conversation?
Thank you. We were actually having very interesting conversations, and the wonderful example from Kazakhstan. And mostly, so what we were talking about, and I think everybody has this challenge, and I was seeing things in the chat as well. The first challenge that we have as communicators is trying to translate incredibly technical and heavy information into plain language without then being accused of trying to dilute the data and the information we're receiving. And there's always that balance that we need to keep when it comes to how much are we communicating and to who are we communicating it to? Because this was one of the discussions we were having. It's less about mass communication and it's more about less communication, but to a tailored audience that actually hits the mark a little better. And we had interventions, and these are very, very good notes. And I don't actually have the answers to this, and I hope somebody does. What do we do with communities that are still offline, that are still very much isolated, and who are the ones where water and sanitation are the real crisis? How do we reach these communities, not only with our communication and advocacy, but with our financing, right? Because we do know that there are communities out there, and we do know we still have billions of people who are still lacking from safe drinking water and sanitation services. And then we were also discussing what do we do at the national level and how do we fix the problems of caring about our waters, but then being the ones who pollute them and the ones who destroy them. How do we get to terms to that thing? And how can we be the ones asking for help, but also the ones that are creating the problems?
Thank you so much, Felicia. If I could jump in there, I have my eye on the time. You raised quite a number of questions, and I see in the chat Zoe is also raising a question that I will pass on to Qaanitah. She also gives us reflections from a breakout room and some closing thoughts. Zoe's question is around how journalists are deeply afraid to investigate or report stories where corruption activities are present. And with that, I welcome you, Qaanitah. Your reflections from your breakout room and also some closeout thoughts.
Thank you very much. It's just, to understand and to create that constant realization that bad politics results in bad realities for people. And there's nothing more sort of visceral that you feel the consequence of bad politics as a result of not having water in your tap. And so when it comes to the question of like, how do you keep exposing this and the consequences of it? I think that we have to bear that realization that if someone can steal someone's access to clean drinking water, it's as good as treasonous in some ways, murderous, if you like. And so that's why by not taking away from what actually will persist if we don't expose this. And that was the important thing for us when we were exposing the water tanker mafia, when we were exposing the collusion of criminals and politicians and municipal officials, is to say that if it's done at this scale and we know about it, there's so much that's happening that we don't know about. And I think that in a city like mine, in Johannesburg, is that we've seen the direct link of the reportage and the fixing of the solution. When people realized, and it made sense, that 23 days without water is not as a result of the weather, and it's because of these bad officials, and we put their faces out there. It mobilized a response, and then it was eventually resolved, and there was a commitment. At the same time, we had a politician that, in response to the water crisis and in response to the fact that people had not water for 3 days, for 3 weeks rather, says to the community, well, don't think we as politicians are not affected. Sometimes we have to go to hotels to shower. And that tone deafness of result of what ordinary communities have to deal with resulted in widespread anger. And it sort of clocked home as a result, both to residents, but also to the politicians, to understand that the privilege of a sentiment like that, and that actually it's not the case that we are all affected equally. It's not like we all equal in how this problem affects us. And that's actually, I think, what set it in motion set it in motion to see a resolution versus, people just being angry and venting on Facebook.
Thank you very much. Just to pick on the points you made, we're not affected equally, but I also connect this with something that I picked from Jonathon's breakout room, where he said we all have responsibility to water. So indeed, we might not all be equally affected, but we cannot take away the fact that everyone, journalists, non-journalists, we all have responsibility to water. Jonathon, I turn to you. I know it's past your bedtime, but please give us some of your reflections from your breakout rooms very quickly as we call it a wrap.
Yeah, amazing. We had some really great and in-depth conversations in our breakout room. But coming back to, I guess, some core questions around how do we reimagine our relationship with water, and how do we define our individual relationships with water? And one of the attendees in the breakout room said it so beautifully and so simply, that water is life. And I had this amazing opportunity to reflect on that, to say, well, absolutely. And that term, water is life, it's a universal thing. It doesn't sit within an Indigenous framework or a non-Indigenous framework. It extends beyond statute, legislation, regulation, and it extends beyond the linguistic boundaries or barriers that we see across continents, across nation states as well. So it's one of the beautiful things that across the diversity that is the globe, that there is a universal statement that water is life, and people can connect to that and see what is their role and responsibility in looking after waterways, whether that's drinking water, whether that's environmental and cultural flows. Something so simple as water is life is so universal that everyone can connect to. And so that's a big one. I think for me, we ended on sort of a First Nations Dreamtime stories, which is sort of like a proverb for people trying to connect with it. And it's a story of a greedy frog who consumed a lot of water in a waterhole, and to the point where there was no water left for any other animals. And so all the animals took turns trying to make this greedy frog laugh. And eventually he let out a bellowing roar, and all that water flowed back into the waterway. But it's a universal story because it teaches us about what is our relationship and what is our role and responsibility to water. And that if everybody only takes what they need, then nobody goes without. And I think that is a really important lesson for us across the globe, that if we don't see water as an asset or as a resource that can be harvested or extracted, and if everyone only takes what they need, then nobody goes without.
Thank you so very much indeed. I really do appreciate that, Jonathon. Yama, thank you. Really do appreciate all your thoughts. Thank you, Felicia. Thank you, Qaanitah. And thank you to everyone that has joined us from different parts of the world. I do hope that the insights from today's session will stay with you, will also shape the work that you do. One thing is clear. Water inequality is not an accident. It's shaped by legal system, political system, financial flows. We've explored all of that. And your job as communicators is to go, beyond that surface and make the invisible visible. And I do hope that the insights from today's session will enable you to do that a lot more. Many thanks indeed. And thank you to Grundfos Foundation for making this possible. Really do appreciate it. As we bring the Water in Communications 2026 to a close, I want to say thank you to all of you that have participated. On Thursday, it will be the last session. What comes next after all of this training and insights that we've gained and so much to learn? What comes next? What are the signal stories out there? How can we strengthen our stories? That will be on Thursday, 25th of June, as Andre Norgren from Siwi and I will walk you through the second workshop in this series, as just helping you to know what signal stories are out there. How do you take it from here? That will be on Thursday. So please join us for that next and last session on Thursday. Away from that, as you see on the next slide, I mentioned earlier, you have the chance for your story to be featured at World Water Week. First, you need to express your interest. You don't have to write any story at this point, but you have until next week, Monday or Tuesday, the 30th of June, to express your interest in submitting a story. And then you have 2 more weeks to develop that story up until July 10th. And this is the QR code for you to submit your story. All the links are also very available on the drive. This is the QR code to the drive, the full information for August session, the program, the summaries from the chat, everything you need regarding this sessions you will find on this Google Drive. If anything is missing or one link or the other is not working, please let me know and I'll be happy to fix that. I mentioned that there is a WhatsApp group from last year's participants. I think about 90 of them coming together, staying engaged, sharing opportunities with each other. Feel free to also join the group if you will. There's also a LinkedIn group, I believe, where professionals share opportunities around water, share their stories. Feel free to join. One of the points or one of the essence of this water in communication is also to bring people together. So we do encourage you to stay connected with each other. And with that, I want to say thank you. That's about it. Fill out the survey form that pops up on your screen when you exit the meeting. It helps us improve the quality of the Water in Communication series. At the end of the series, you'll get an email that gives you the opportunity to do an in-depth review of the program in its entirety and how we can improve it. See you all on Thursday. I hope you will join us again, that you share this, remind some of the people that have signed up for this to also join us, and that you stay curious, you keep writing and telling water stories in ways that move people to act and to hold power to account, as we've learned today. Until Thursday, all the best and take care. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.